Welcome to the Michael Shermer Show. As you can tell, we have a new name. The former Science Salon podcast has been changed to the Michael Shermer Show because a couple of reasons. One, I noticed a lot of people kind of tripped up on the word salon when I would tell people the name of my podcast, Science Salon. They go, science what? And I think in 2020, salon the word has been used so much for nail salons and hair salons and so on, whether they're open or closed, kind of drowned out the older meaning, which a lot of people didn't get anyway, the old Enlightenment salons where people would gather to talk about big ideas, which is how we started this podcast with in-person events. In any case, also noticed that a lot of podcasts, which is becoming a very competitive, crowded field, a lot of the hosts just use their name in the title of the podcast show. And so that seems to be acceptable, although I was a little uncomfortable initially just calling it by my own name. And finally, science. I treat science very broadly. To me, the use of employment of reason, rationality, empiricism, logic, etc., to address any particular claim to knowledge that somebody has as a form of science. But I think most people think of it more as physics and biology and astronomy, maybe some of the social sciences like neuroscience or cognitive science, but I want to have guests on and talk about history and philosophy and social, cultural issues like race and gender and so on. And although I treat them as all scientific claims, I think most people don't. They think of those as just kind of a broader talk about other issues unrelated to science, or apparently so. So we're going with the new name for all of those reasons. And so before I introduce today's guest, let me make a note about the support for the podcast, which is primarily through the Skeptic Society. So I'm the executive director of the Skeptic Society, the publisher of Skeptic Magazine, and the podcast is under that umbrella at skeptic.com. And the reason we do that is because I don't want to flood the show with advertising. We just have one advertiser that I'll mention and talk about in just a moment. But let me make a note that your support of the Skeptic Society in general, which you can go to at skeptic.com/donate, is what supports the podcast primarily, along with all our other activities that we do, and our staff of 6 people and so on and so forth to run any kind of organization like this. And so if you're inclined to support this show or our work in general, and or you can also leave us in your will or estate, which a lot of people have done. And we've built something of a war chest, as it were, for an in perpetuity continuation of the Skeptic Society and Skeptic Magazine after I'm gone. So I think this is the kind of thing I don't want just tied to me. It's not a cult of personality kind of thing. It's not about me. It's about the ideas and science and reason and rationality and critical thinking. And so to that extent, your support is greatly appreciated. The one and only advertiser we do have is Great Courses, the teaching company's Great Courses, with their new app, which you can get on your phone for the greatcoursesplus.com. And therefore, instead of purchasing entire courses, which I've done literally hundreds of them over the decades, and now you can just get the app, and for a monthly subscription, you can access thousands of courses, and each of those thousands of courses has dozens of lectures, and you can just bounce around. And so it's really a great way to do it. I listen to them when I'm out and about running errands, driving, cycling, walking my dog, running errands, whatever, doing yard work. And it's really a great tool for that. And so for listeners of my show, you can get a free subscription for the first couple of weeks at thegreatcoursesplus.com/Shermer. So it's thegreatcoursesplus.com/Shermer. Okay. So my guest today is Dr. Daniel Lieberman. His new book is Exercised: Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding. Dr. Lieberman is Edwin M. Lerner Professor of Biological Sciences and Professor of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. He's the author of the national bestseller, The Story of the Human Body, Evolution, Health, and Disease. He lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's a super interesting conversation along the lines of what I was talking about. It doesn't seem like it's strictly science, although it is. He is an anthropologist and a evolutionary biologist, and so It was interesting to get his take on studying non-weird people, weird being Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And that is, you study hunter-gatherers and subsistence farmers in Africa, for example. And so he opens his book saying, if you go to these people and tell them, ask them, do you go for 5-mile runs, or would you ever do a triathlon or something? I mean, they look at you like you're mad. I mean, why would anybody purposely do physical activity when you get so much of that from just daily life? So that's where we begin the conversation. What is the difference between activity and exercise? Most of in our human history, we were so physically active just surviving, you didn't have to exercise. Life was exercise. So then we build from there what happened historically, and then how our bodies have changed because of the modern industrialized world, as well as diets and sleep, the different kinds of exercises you can get: walking, running, hiking, cycling, swimming, weightlifting, any kind of resistance exercise, and how that compares to cardio exercise. We talk about why we have to age and die, some of the theories about that, and what exercise and nutrition and the other things can do to stave off that inevitable ending we all are facing. We talk about sitting versus standing. There was a fad for a while about never sit, just stand there at your desk, elevated laptop, and maybe even a treadmill that you're walking on while you're working. And then we finish up talking about diseases and all the many different diseases that exercise really does help push back against: obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, Alzheimer's, depression, and cancer. And then we end talking about immune systems and exercise in the context of COVID, and how much exercise you should get each week, and where those numbers came from. So with that, I give you Dan Lieberman. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Your book, I will introduce it properly here, is Exercised: Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding. I love that cover. I guess these are the earliest Paleolithic marathon runners we have, or triathletes, or I don't know what they are. Oh no, he looks like he's on a treadmill.
I'm glad you like the cover. It was right. Well, it's meant to be a kind of a play on the the pictograms from the South African cave art.
Oh,
and I was imagining, because in the book I make fun of treadmills throughout the book.
Yes.
And I was imagining a Paleolithic attitude towards a treadmill.
Well, I love that opening story of you hauling a treadmill, expensive treadmill, all the way to Africa to put these hunter-gatherer and farmers on it to see, and they looked at you like you're out of your mind. It's an interesting perspective on this problem.
Treadmill in Nairobi.
Yeah, Nairobi. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I liked about your book was that you say at the start it's not a self-help book. And it's not in the traditional sense, but the problem with all those self-help books and why they don't really work is because they're not really grounded in science, or more to the point, if they have any science at all, they have like one study. And then the author takes the one study and spins out the 10 things you should do based on this one study. And what I loved about your book is that, you have like 10 studies, or here's a consensus among the exercise physiologists about this thing here. There's 4 papers in favor, 2 against, 1 conflicted, and here's what we think might be the case. And that's at least honest. And although you can see why, if you're a pop science writer or a journalist or whatever, a self-help writer, that's harder to make that kind of sexy and here's the bullet points you have to do. Although you do that at the end. So I think yours is the best self-help book I've ever read on exercise and working out, even though it doesn't have that simplicity. But this in part, I think, explains why we're going through this replication crisis and this kind of lack of trust by the public in science, is because it looks like from the outside, we're just constantly changing our minds. Coffee is bad, coffee is good. Eggs were bad, now eggs are good. So and so if you say, well, exercise is this, well, how do you know? Because last year you said it was that. And some of that, I think, comes from this oversimplification. And so I love that about your book. So let's start there and just give us some idea about how you got into doing this massive piece of research on this subject.
Well, thank you. Indeed. I mean, I was very blessed to have a great editor who allowed me to have as many footnotes as I wanted to, or endnotes as I wanted to, and so I could kind of combine what's hopefully a popular book, that you don't have to be an expert to read, with some scholarships that anybody who wants to learn more can find out more. So really, the book started. I actually describe it very honestly in the book. It started because when I was finishing my last book, which is called The Story of the Human, and the punchline of that book, if I could sort of distill it, is that we never evolved to be healthy. We evolved to be healthy only to the extent that health promotes reproductive success, and there are all kinds of things we evolved good for us, right? So as I was finishing up the book in 2012, I went to Ironman in Kona to see the World Championship there, which is I've now been there twice. It's an astonishing thing to watch. And there are people just doing stuff that I just don't get, right? I mean, first of all, a 2.4-mile open water swim gives me palpitations just to think about. I mean, I'll never ever do that, basically. I like biking, but so that's how I get that. But then adding a full marathon after a 112-mile bike ride in the 90-degree heat is just not something I would. And yet there are people who pay $10,000 to do this. I mean, the bicycles they use are amazing. I mean, the amount of money that people throw into this is a millionaire sport for the most part. And so I went to that kind of astonished about why anybody would do that. And I study exercise. I'm studying physical activity, but it's kind of mind blowing. And then a few weeks later, I was in the Sierra Tarahumara in northern Mexico, doing fieldwork among the Tarahumara Native Americans, and it was the first time I'd been there. I've now been there about 6 or 7 times, and I was talking to all kinds of folks there, traveling around, sleeping on the floors of pueblos, and collecting data. And I had this sort of list of questions I ask everybody, being a good anthropologist. And one of them was about training for running, because they're famous for running these long distances, and nobody seemed to know what I was talking about. And finally, there was this one elderly guy who I was told was a great runner, some guy in his mid-70s, and he started, he, like everybody else, he starts off a little reticent with, but then as I started asking him about his running and the races he ran in the past and how he used to hunt deer, he was kind of, telling me with pride about his amazing running accomplishments. And then when I asked him about training through this interpreter, because I don't speak Raramuri, the native language, he was really confused, but he kind of stuck with me. And so my interpreter was explaining how, this guy who's asking you questions, every morning he runs 5 miles and he does this, he does that. How do don't you do that? And he answered again through the interpreter, why would anybody run if they didn't have to? And, I was just writing a book about how we didn't evolve to be healthy. And all of a sudden I realized, yeah, of course. And we didn't evolve to exercise either. I mean, running when you don't have to. If you're a physically active person who's a farmer carrying water up and down hills and carrying firewood and working all day long and struggling to get enough food, why on earth would you do that? It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And that was kind of that spark. I realized that's my next book. I need to write a book about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So from there, give us a comparison of what modern peoples do for exercise compared to what these indigenous peoples or hunter-gatherers would do in a day, comparable to, let's say, calorie count or energy expenditure or something like that. In other words, a typical day in the life of a hunter-gatherer would be the equivalent of what for a modern person who works out?
Well, I think the easiest way, most people don't really get calories. So I think the easiest way to describe that is to say, look, well, first of all, let's get some definitions under our belt, right? Yeah. So one is that physical activity is just moving, right? It's just anytime you do anything, it's physical activity. But exercise is voluntary, discretionary physical activity that you sort of plan for the sake of health and fitness, right? And so like hunter-gatherers just don't exercise. They don't do that. That doesn't make any sense to them, nor do subsistence farmers. In terms of work, I think what's really interesting, and we've known this actually since the 1970s, when the first serious field work that was done that measured hunter-gatherer physical activity was done by a guy named Richard Lee, amongst the foragers of the Kalahari. He wrote a fantastic book that I had to read as an undergraduate. And he basically claimed that, and wrote, and that hunter-gatherers basically are active for only a few hours a day. And since then, studies from hunter-gatherer populations from all over the planet have borne out what he said. So the Hadza hunter-gatherers, who are probably the best studied now, we have the most data on them, and there's like modern sensor data from them. A typical Hadza hunter-gatherer walks between 5 and 9 miles a day, and is basically engages in moderate to vigorous physical activity about 2.25 hours a day. That's it. The U.S. Surgeon General begs us, Americans, to be active for 150 minutes a week, which boils down to 21 minutes a day. So they're basically 6 times more active than we're requested to be active.
Right.
And the vast majority of Americans don't even get 21 minutes a day. So by some estimates, they're about 10 times more active, but they're not crazy active. They're kind of just moderately active,
right.
And they spend most of the day sitting around, resting, not wasting energy.
Right. Yeah. So in other words, if you lead a relatively sedentary lifestyle in a modern Western city and you go to work and whatnot, you really should be working out, say, 2 hours a day to do the equivalent of what a hunter-gatherer does, just living life.
Yeah, exactly.
And by 2 hours, I mean
American
moderate exercise, hiking, walking.
Yeah.
You don't have to do an Ironman.
Exactly. Yeah. So, basically an hour to 2 hours a day, because most people are, they are still walking around. They're getting to the bathroom. They're, getting to their car. I mean, who knows what they're doing? Yeah. Walking around the aisles of the supermarket. So, most people an hour and a half a day extra would pretty much get them up to where hunter-gatherers are. But that's asking a lot, apparently, because the vast majority of us don't exercise in our leisure time.
Right.
So exercise is still something that modern Americans, just like all other humans for all of human history, evolutionary history, have avoided.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no sense in having to do it if you're already doing it for just your life in general. Yeah, it's always been my sense that 150 minutes a week is way too low. Maybe they're giving that moderate figure knowing that Americans are probably not even going to make that. So the recommendation of 300, like yesterday's New York Times article here,
right,
to lose weight, exercise a lot, 300 minutes a week. Well, even, I my weight fluctuates here, and they're 10 pounds, 15 pounds up and down. And I find it really hard to lose weight just exercising. That's not enough. And I think that's probably the wrong reason to recommend exercising. You have to have other motives. If that was your only motive, I can see why people have a hard time with it. Because also, as you point out in your book, when you exercise, when you start cranking up the exercise, you get hungry. And so you come back from a workout and you slam down an extra 500 calories that maybe you wouldn't have had before. And then it's a wash on what you just did.
That's right. So, look, 300 minutes a week, which is what that article argued, is really, it's only 40 minutes a day. It's still not that much, right? But it's true that so much of the lens of health and physical activity is viewed through the lens of weight loss, right? Because that is, a big major health challenge of our day, and people evaluate the benefits of physical activity as in terms of how much, or it's often evaluated in terms of how effective it is for weight loss, and that's just an overly simplistic, just overly narrow way to evaluate, the benefits of being physically active. But going back to the 150 minutes a week, I mean, yeah, people would benefit from getting more than 150 minutes, most people. But 150 minutes still is a benefit compared to none. So if you look at the mortality curves, right? So if you look at the relative rate of death against time spent exercising a week, just 60 minutes a week, right? So an hour a week, we're not talking a lot, right? Can lower your rate of mortality by about 30%. And the reason that the U.S. Surgeon General and the American Heart Association and the World Health Organization and basically every medical organization on the planet has kind of zeroed in on 150 minutes. I mean, it's an arbitrary number, but it still yields a substantial benefit compared to complete sedentism. So on average, the average human being, if they get 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise a week, will lower their relative rate of mortality by about 50%, which is still a substantial benefit.
Yeah.
So So some is better than none, but more would be even
That's
better.
what the bottom baseline of doing next to nothing. So I think of it as an asymptotic
Yeah,
curve where, from 0 to 150, you get a lot, 150 to 300, a little less. And then let's say you go to 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day, it's going to flatten out. And if you're out there 6 hours a day or you're a gym rat,
precisely.
you're not getting to get any extra benefits.
Precisely. It's exactly. So that curve is in the book in chapter 11. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have it here to hold up. Sorry, I just had the PDF of the book. But yeah, no. So I thought that was also interesting. So it's all kind of a trade-off in terms of how much energy you consume and what benefits you get from it. So from a bigger perspective, I think of the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. Gives us the first law of life, which is to push back against entropy, to expend energy, to carve out little niches of order. And that, if you don't do anything, things just run down. Gardens need to get weeded, and bodies need to work out. And so it's pretty much a daily thing, or at least every other day kind of thing, where if you don't use those muscles, then they start to tear down. I guess weaken would be the way to say it. I thought of reading your book, The Astronauts, that did the exercises on the space station versus those that didn't, and how much weaker they got. And that's almost a perfect experiment of where you have no stress on your body because you're weightless, versus strapping into the treadmill and pounding on it. So you get some exertion there to push back against that entropy. And I think that, on balance, that's kind of the bigger picture of what you're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key word, the two key words you just mentioned are trade-off and stress, and both are really critical, right? So, the equation of life is basically energy in, babies out, right? That's what all natural selection really cares about, right? We get food in, and then ultimately we reproduce, and that's what natural selection favors, those of us who manage to turn more energy into more babies who then have more babies. That's the basic equation of life. But the way in which we then cycle energy involves lots of other trade-offs, right? So whether you spend that energy on maintenance, whether you spend it on growth, whether you spend it on physical activity, whether you spend it on reproduction, all of these are trade-offs that are constantly being made. But we evolved in times when those trade-offs were really substantial, right? When calories are limited and you can't spend an energy reproducing because you're being physically active, that's going to count against you. So in those circumstances, you want to be really stingy with calories, and that's what our bodies evolved to do. So the reason that exercise, the fundamental reason exercise, physical activity is good for us, is that it's stressful, and that stress wreaks havoc in our bodies, right? You create little micro tears in your muscle and little micro cracks in your bone, and you have reactive oxygen species that want to basically, burn everything in your body and create mutations and cause inflammation. But our bodies have evolved to turn on all kinds of repair and maintenance mechanisms in response to those stresses. So that's the good news. So that if the stress of exercising mounts an even bigger repair and maintenance response. But the problem is that we also get those stresses just by sitting around and looking at our TVs and whatever, but we don't turn on those repair and maintenance mechanisms as much. So without the stress, we don't allocate the energy to kind of keep our bodies humming, and the result is that we deteriorate more rapidly. We're more vulnerable to disease, so you can live to a ripe old age without exercising. You're just going to be much more likely to get a variety of diseases like heart disease and diabetes and osteoporosis, and the list is very, very, very long.
Yeah, you cover all that in the last chapter, I think, which is probably the most important one of all, because those are the things that kill us. But I think it helps to pinpoint what the dependent variable is. I mean, people often talk about weight loss or longevity, like making it to 90 is going to be the be-all, end-all. But what about just quality of life now? Like this week, I want to feel better. I'm not worried about what I'm going to feel like in 40 years. I want to feel good now. And that's a different kind of metric in terms of like what kind of exercise you should be doing, or the balance of different kinds of exercise. And since you're an evolutionary biologist and anthropologist, I wonder if you'd care to weigh in on the theory of the different competing theories of why we age. Why do we have to get old and age and decline at all? I have a 4.5-year-old son, and when he gets bruised or cut up, you can almost watch it healing. in real time. I mean, it's incredible. And, this just doesn't happen to me. And so why not? It used to be that way in my body, but it isn't anymore. So how come this has to happen, or seemingly does happen?
Well, I mean, that's one of the age-old questions in evolutionary biology, and I think there's a general consensus now among those who study it that really aging is basically a consequence of selection ceasing to care, right? So in organisms where there's no benefit to getting older in terms of reproductive success, you enter what's called the selective shadow. I think that was the term of Sir Peter Medawar, great biologist. And once you're in the selective shadow, there's no natural selection is not going to promote any mechanisms that fight the processes of senescence, the decay of cells, the mutations in DNA. There's a long, telomere shortening. There's a long list of things that deteriorate and go wrong. And but humans are an interesting exception because we're one of the very few species that typically lives beyond our reproductive age. So the only other species for which there's really good data are orcas, killer whales, but we don't know too much about them. But hunter-gatherers and who, if they survive childhood, they typically live into their 70s. They live about 2 decades beyond their reproductive age. And importantly, study after study has shown that in those grandparent decades, they're physically active. They're foraging. They're hunting. They're collecting honey. They're killing kudu. They're digging up tubers. They're doing all kinds of stuff. They're preparing food. They're running after kids in camp. And that physical activity not only improves their reproductive success because they're benefiting their children and their grandchildren, but it's also turning on those mechanisms we were just talking about. It's turning on those repair and maintenance mechanisms. So I think that, and so one of the arguments I make in the book is that physical activity and aging are related in more than just a simple way. It's actually both a cause and consequence of our exceptional longevity is both a cause and a consequence of our evolution as physically active creatures. And today, people can, of course, live into be grandparents without being very physically active, but they can't do it very easily without medical help. Let's take Donald Trump, right? A guy who hates exercise. Yeah. I don't think he ventures onto a golf course without a golf cart. There was a New Yorker article which pointed out that he thinks of exercise as being like a battery, and as if you use up energy, you won't get it back, right? and we know that his health is his health has been made possible by he's on lower cholesterol lowering drugs, he's on blood pressure lowering drugs, he's gotten a lot of help when he got COVID. He got all kinds of treatments that you and I can't get,
including a steroidal
medical
drug
care. Exactly, so medical care can help folks today live fairly long, but it doesn't mean that they're living a long health span. So it's often useful to distinguish between lifespan, how long you actually live, versus health span, which is how long you have a high functional capacity.
Right.
And we should also think about health span in the absence of modern medical care, because we have all kinds of medical care today that improves people's health span, even when they have chronic diseases. And of course, until recently, that didn't exist.
Yeah. You mentioned grandparents, so maybe natural selection selected for us to live long enough to be grandparents because, extended families are often needed for raising children and so on. So you're a parent, then you're a grandparent, maybe you're a great-grandparent. But by the time you're a great-grandparent, there's already 2 generations taking care of the next generation of children. In other words, it tapers off pretty quickly. So natural selection wouldn't select for us to be great-great-great-great-grandparents. It's just nothing more to contribute at some point.
Yeah, no, the older you get, the less the selective benefit of living will be. And so, there's going to be a limit in, plus, as you say, the law of entropy is things fall apart. You have to put energy back into systems in order to prevent entropy. And you can't fight entropy forever. No species has figured out how to do that.
Right.
The ones that do tend to live the longest tend to be in low energy environments, so very cold environments. Which is why some people think that they go out and take lots of cold showers or something like that.
Yeah.
They can live longer. To the best of my knowledge, there's absolutely no evidence that has any benefit whatsoever.
We've debunked so many of those quack remedies for longevity and living forever, and uploading your mind, and cryonics, and then all the all the supplements you can take. You probably know about Ray Kurzweil's program. Gosh. 250 supplements a day and all that. I did that for about a year when I was a cyclist in the 80s, and you just pee it out. I mean, your urine is like bright orange green. It's like, okay, well, that was a waste of money, and it does no good at all. There's only so many ways you can really reprogram those cells, and there's so many systems in place at once, all of which decline at the same time. The idea that there's one magic bullet you could take that's going to stop that is just, not realistic.
But it's profitable, right? Think about the number of really smart people who, Kurzweil among them, Linus Pauling, another, who've thought they've come up with a simple solution to aging. They've all been wrong. And that's because it's a complex multivariate problem that involves every system of the body. And every time you take something, there are side effects, including even vitamin C. So
I met Ray
the fact of the matter is we will never.
I met Ray at I met Ray Kurzweil at a one of his Singularity summits, and he got up there and gave his "I have a dream" speech. We're all going to live forever, and the first person to live 1,000 years is in this room today, and the whole thing. I mean, it was very motivational. I have to say, it was like, wow, yeah. And then you start looking into it, it's like, I don't know. And then I saw him afterwards, and he's about 10 years older than me, and I just remember looking at him, going, "Dude, you look like you're 10 years older than me." I mean, this is just inevitable. And it's like that book Deepak Chopra wrote about. It was something like Eat Right, Live Forever. I don't know I forget it was like a quantum aging book or something like that. And his author photo is on the cover, and you look at it now and it's like, dude, you look like you've aged just like the rest of us, and there's no magic bullets to putting a stop to that. So the point of your book is that it's quality of life now, and that's what exercise can make a difference. You'll feel better tomorrow, next week, next month, and your quality of life and what you enjoy. Forget what's going to happen 50 years from now.
True enough, I agree. But let's also not pretend that exercise is a magic bullet either. So sometimes people also, I think, oversell exercise as being, a surefire way to live to your, to live like Ruth Bader Ginsburg into your late 80s, and that sure helped her, but it doesn't help everybody.
Right.
And there are plenty of people who exercise who still get cancer and whatever. It improves your probability of living longer. It decreases your vulnerability. But it's not. Look, I have relatives who are very physically active who've done great, and I've also had relatives who've been very physically inactive, and they're still also in their 80s. There's a difference maybe in frailty and so on, but I think people are naturally skeptical. After all, given what you're interested in, they're skeptical because they just see with their own eyes that we oversimplify. We tell them that sitting is the new smoking, and yet they know plenty of people who sit all day long and they're living into their 80s or 90s. They maybe they get only 6 or 7 hours of sleep a night. They're doing just fine. Right. So why tell me that I have to get 8 hours? So we're so prescriptive, and we oversimplify, take 2 pills and call me in the morning kind of way of thinking about health. And so I think it naturally breeds skepticism against science that actually could be valuable.
Yeah, I had I read Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, and I love that book. I thought he was great. And he was on Joe Rogan talking about sleep for like 3 hours, and just gold mine of stuff, but he really was focused on that 8 hours. Anyway, then it comes out during this replication crisis discussion that even he was guilty of a little bit of this, because apparently the curve is like a camel curve. There's 2 humps, binomial curve or whatever that's called. So 8 hours is, in terms of the dependent variable, was performance. So 8 hours was one peak, but I think it was like 5 hours was another peak, and he just lopped off the curve because it didn't fit the narrative. Like 8 hours, everyone needs 8 hours. And it's just messier to say, some people need 5, some people need 8, some people probably need 6, and then all of a sudden you have a long chapter that doesn't come to some bullet point conclusion. There again, that's part of the problem.
Right. I mean, if you look at the data, if you average all those curves, for the average human being, the optimum is about 7. So for overall, statistical average is that 7 hours of sleep, and that is not self-reported sleep. That's actually
Recorded,
measured sleep.
Right.
those folks tend to do the best. The other thing is that kind of I think one is concerning about Matthew Walker's book is that he buys into this myth that it's the modern world that's robbed us of sleep. That telephones and iPhones and electricity and TVs and all that, and that in the old days, in the golden old days, people all slept 8 hours. Well, people have gone out to measure hunter-gatherers and subsistence farmers and other populations that have no electricity, and guess what? None of them sleep 8 hours. They hunter-gatherers sleep 6 to 7 hours on average, and in fact, if you look in the historical records, there's no evidence that anybody ever slept on average 8 hours. It's just and then what we do is we make people stressed about it, right? We tell them. It's a very value laden kind of thing. It's virtue signaling, right? I get my 8 hours of sleep, and then we make people feel bad for not sleeping 8 hours. And then what does that do? It makes them stressed. Like, oh my God, I'm not getting my 8 hours. Maybe I need to buy these pills, or maybe I need to buy a special mattress, or maybe I need to cover my window with special, light, removing curtains so that I'll get better sleep, and get a sound machine that will drown out the neighbor's dog or whatever. And then, of course, once you're stressed, stress elevates cortisol. Cortisol it keeps you awake. And so we create this kind of vicious circle by making people feel bad, making them feel ashamed, making them feel somehow that there's something wrong with them when they're actually completely normal and healthy.
Yeah, he also said no screens in bed, no computers or iPads or anything like that. Well, when I can't fall asleep, I queue up lately I've been doing the Netflix The Crown series, which is beautifully produced. And, it's kind of, junk TV, just the royals or whatever. I have no trouble falling asleep. I just fall right asleep in the middle of one of the episodes, and it's just like reading or something, whatever. It's just kind of a relaxing thing to do. The glow, the blueness that he said behind the screen, it has nothing to do with my sleep pattern.
Yeah, it's not been my experience either. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just to put another point on your thing, the exercises and everything, I had Marta Zaraska on my podcast. Her book is Growing Young. So she points out exercise is great and all that. Exercise lowers mortality risk by 33%. A happy marriage lowers it by 49%. Eating 6 or more servings per day of fruit and vegetables lowers mortality by 26%. Having a large social network lowers it by 45%. Eating 3 servings a day of whole grains lowers mortality risk by 23%. Feeling you have others you can count on for support lowers it by 35%. And then finally, eating a Mediterranean diet lowers mortality risk by 21%. Living with someone lowers it by 32%. So yeah, again, the exercise by itself is not a magic bullet. Lots of other things to do.
Right. But of course, I love the idea that you can say, eating ice cream, affects your mortality rate by X%. I mean, these numbers are all really concerning because, it depends on how much of a Mediterranean diet eat. I mean, how large is your social network? I mean, these are really hard numbers that we all love to be told, this is the secret to this and that's the secret to that. But it's a complicated multivariate problem in which there's also a lot of covariance. So I'll make a bet that people who have big family networks are also probably eating more healthy food, and they're probably also exercising more. So there's, these are not independent variables, and they're, right now we live in a world in which there's growing inequality in terms of health outcome, and a lot of that has to do with growing inequality in terms of quality of life, which includes friends, diet, exercise, stress. These all covary enormously. And so epidemiologists, if you look at big epidemiological papers, they often even don't separate diet and exercise because they can't.
Right.
We don't have enough information for most people because most people who exercise also eat a more healthy diet.
Yeah, we've done a lot in Skeptic on diets and nutrition, and it's really hard to determine causality, mainly because most of it is self-report data, which is not reliable. And even the ones where they do studies in prisons where these people aren't going anywhere, and we know exactly what they're going to eat. Yeah, well, turns out when you look into the studies, some of the the people in the N changed. Prisoners leave, new prisoners come in, and they're part of the sample. Okay, but what was that guy doing before he got into prison? Maybe that's another variable that we're not controlling. So really, really hard to determine causality.
Yeah, exactly.
But I like that about
Totally
your book,
agree.
because you cover all so many different studies on each of those different factors. So I'm this guy you described as an ethicist here. Chief among these myths is the notion that we're supposed to want to exercise. There's a class of people whom I define as exorcists, who like to brag about exercise and repeatedly remind us that exercise is medicine, a magic pill that slows aging and delays death. You know the type. According to exorcists, we were born to exercise because for millions of years our hunter-gatherer ancestors survived through walking, running, climbing, and other physical activities. Anyway, I guess that was me before I read your book. I think, because it feels like, I work out on average 2 hours a day. For 2020, it was a little unusual because COVID, and I'm not traveling anymore. And like everybody else, I'm just stuck at home. So I do a little more exercise. But it does feel like it's not a panacea, and I think your book supports this. It kind of just bumps up a whole lot of different things. It strengthens your immune system. It pushes back against cancer and osteoporosis and weight and cardiovascular and diabetes and so forth. So just kind of walk us through some of the, kind of the little things that exercise can make a difference. And more importantly, what exactly should somebody do for exercise?
Well, first of all, let's start with the problem of exorcists, which are the people who nag and brag about exercise, in which is that they're very off-putting to people who are struggling to exercise. And I've learned over the year, because I'm a runner. I like to run marathons. I could put myself in that category, but I've learned I've tried at least to be really careful about not coming across as being judgmental about my exercise relative to others. Because I think if you don't like to exercise but you want to try to be more exercise, it just makes you feel bad when people start pulling this on others. So I think that's why I kind of go after exorcists, because they're not helping the rest of the world. But that said, there is, the reason that they're also irritating is that what they're saying is partly true, and we all know it, right? It's, Hippocrates knew that exercise was good for you. Aristotle, Confucius. This is not a novel insight. This is an ancient truth. It's a cliche even. Like most cliches, it's true, and that's why it's a cliche. So what we learned over the last few decades is just why and how exercise is so beneficial. And really, I think if there's any one major, probably the biggest benefit, is that it fights inflammation. One of the most exciting innovations over the last few years is that we learned that inflammation is a major contributor to probably most of the diseases that are going to kill us, even in the COVID era, right? So heart disease, Alzheimer's, many cancers. Diabetes, these kind of chronic illnesses are all related to the immune system kind of being on a little bit on an overboil, basically, and the immune system then starts fighting our own biology, creating plaques in our arteries, creating plaques in our brains, and so on. And it turns out one of the most exciting innovation things that we've learned over the last few years is that the major producer of anti-inflammatory molecules, what we call cytokines, that dampen down inflammation, are from muscles. So it turns out muscles, not white blood cells, produce sometimes 100 times more of these inflammation-regulating molecules than our white blood cells, but they're turned on by exercise. And so, if there's probably one chief benefit of exercise, is it dampens down inflammation and helps prevent all these diseases. It also helps prevent, we talked earlier about weight gain. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you want to lose weight, you're better off dieting than exercise. No question. You can, if I went for a 5-mile run this morning and I burned 500 calories, but I quickly made that up, with the avocado that I had at lunch, right? Avocado is healthy,
yeah,
right? But it's ridiculously full of calories, right? So I can lose weight much faster by dieting, but the thing that exercise does is it helps us prevent weight gain in the first place. So when they do experiments where they, longitudinal experiments where they have people dieting with exercise versus versus just dieting, the ones who exercise lose just a little bit more weight, not a lot. But then, but then when they stop the diet and people continue to exercise, those are the ones who keep the weight off. But the ones who stop the diet but aren't exercising, the weight comes back with a vengeance. And 90% of diets fail pretty quickly because people aren't exercising. So weight gain is another big issue. And then there's all kinds of other benefits we're just still learning, like exercise turns on, or physical activity turns on the production of antioxidants, which fight many aging processes. Exercise activates enzymes that repair DNA. Activates enzymes that repair proteins that get kind of cooked. They're called glycated proteins that get kind of cooked and get sugars added on, like when you brown bread, basically. Exercise turns on the molecules or the genes that repair muscle and repair bone and repair all kinds of other tissues. It's kind of staggering. We still don't even know all the recent studies have shown. A colleague of mine at MGH here at Harvard did a recent study on all the proteins that are upregulated by exercise. It's like 1,000, and we don't even know what most of them do. And they might not all be good for us, but many of them are.
Yeah. I was just thinking of there's so much we could go on to there. From your first chapter, you have this PAL measure, the physical activity level, the ratio of energy spent in a 24-hour period divided by energy used if you didn't do anything. Now, and by that, do you mean just lying there flat in bed all day, not like walking to the kitchen and driving to work and walking to your office and so forth?
Yeah, that's basically your basal metabolic rate. So, technically that's measured in a thermoneutral environment. So you're not spending any energy warming your body. You're not digesting any food. You're kind of still in bed in the morning. So imagine you're in a hospital bed all day long with just a remote control and they haven't given you any food.
Right.
That would be your basal metabolic rate. And so most sort of average Americans who have a kind of desk job who aren't exercising, their physical activity level is like 1.6, 1.7.
Right.
If you're a typical hunter-gatherer, again, you're not, doing crazy amounts of exercise, but your physical activity level might be like, or your PAL as we call it, might be like 1.9 or 2. So it's considerably higher, maybe about 15, 20% higher. And if you're a subsistence farmer, it's even a little higher. If you're a Tour de France cyclist, or like when you were like cycling across America, or you had probably a PAL of like 3 or 4. That's huge. So it turns out though that most animals have PALs between 2 and 3. So we're, even sort of physically active human beings aren't, crazy active. But the key thing is that we didn't evolve from rats and mice and bats and whatever. We evolved from apes, right? And chimpanzees and gorillas have incredibly low PALs. So primates in general and apes in particular are couch potatoes. And I've had the privilege of going to watch chimpanzees in the wild, and sure, they run around crazily every once in a while. They have sex and they fight a little bit, but most of the time they're just sitting there placidly, stuffing their faces or sleeping. They're not very physically active creatures.
Yeah.
Gorillas even less so. So we got evolution, natural selection pushed us to be more active than our ancestors, and that selection has affected how our bodies function.
Yeah. Remember when that craze maybe a decade ago came out about sitting at your desk is unhealthy. It's the new smoking, I think, as you put it. And therefore you have to stand at your desk. So there was these contraptions where you could raise the desk and you have your laptop there and you're just standing. And then there were some tools you could buy where you have a treadmill and you're sitting there on the treadmill typing away. It just this always struck me as just ridiculous. I just do my workout, done. Now I'm going to just sit at my desk and write the rest of the day.
Yeah. Well,
was that based on just some study?
Again, it's some of it's. Well, so it is true that very inactive sitting. You look like a squirmer. Like you're a bit of a fidgeter like me, right? And that turns out to be kind of healthier way of sitting than being a very inactive person. But so it turns out that there are healthier and less healthy ways to sit, and standing might be a bit like that. So you only spend about 7 more calories an hour standing. So let's not pretend a standing desk is exercise. It's not the same thing as going for a walk or going for a ride or swimming. Although again, but it's very virtue laden, of course. But if all you do is sit and then you go home and then continue to sit all day, well, maybe the standing desk will help you a
Mm.
bit. But it turns out if you look at the epidemiological data, so again, we should have some question marks here, but the epidemiological data shows that it's leisure time sitting, which is much more associated with poor health outcomes than work time sitting.
Mm.
So if you have a normal job and you work at your desk all day long, but then get some exercise in and maybe walk to work or whatever, you're doing pretty well. But if you sit at your desk all day and then sit at home all evening long and sit at home all morning long and sit in your car to commute and so on, well, surprise, surprise. And I don't think you need a fancy study to tell you that's
Yeah.
when people get into trouble. There's also evidence that interrupted sitting is better, right? So if you get up every once in a while and make a cup of tea or pet your dog or whatever, that helps. It kind of turns on your muscles and uses up sugar and fat in your bloodstream. So the more we study sitting, we realize that not all sitting is the same. But demonizing sitting and pretending that sitting is this kind of modern scourge is just wrong. I mean, the Hadza, the vaunted hunter-gatherers, sit as much as we do. They sit 9 to 10 hours a day.
Yeah. But as you point out in that first chapter, I mean, your subjects there, they just move around a lot. I mean, they do sit around, but then they move and they move and they move, but they're not exercising. It's just life.
That's right. That's right.
So in terms of of motivation, I get the motivation problem. I mean, as you know, I'm a kind of fanatical cyclist, but when I'm on the road pre-COVID, at hotels, I would go down early in the morning and jump on one of the stationary bikes, and I hated it. I just could not. I mean, a half an hour felt like 6 hours. I just couldn't stand it. And so it's not the for me, it's scenery going by, it's the wind, it's the sun, I'm outdoors, I'm going somewhere. That's what it is for me. And it doesn't have to be cycling. I don't like running. I'm not a runner, and I've never liked it. And it gets worse the older I get because of my joints or whatnot. But just walking, kind of a brisk walk with the dog, or hiking if we're in the hills, pretty much the same pace. That seems to, and I was encouraged to see that in your book. That's just as good as hammering out a massive hard triathlon or something like that. In other words, the goal is to move your body, contract and relax those big muscle groups that gets the heart rate going, gets the blood flowing, gets the fluids going through your body to pump out toxins and increase endorphins and all the other things that you document in there.
Yeah. And, the fact of the matter is, if you don't like it, you're not going to do it.
Right.
Unless you're an extraordinary person who's taking your medicine like cod liver oil, that's not a, but look, whatever works, right? And the more we learn, the more we realize that, mixing it up is good. You want to get up a little, sometimes you want to be a little vigorous. Sometimes you want to do some, your bedrock cardio is the kind of, the cardio is like the bedrock of most exercise programs. You want to do some weights occasionally. But again, Hippocrates knew this. I mean, your grandmother knew this.
Right,
I mean,
right.
This is not novel information. We've just kind of commodified it and commercialized it and medicalized it. And we now, of course, understand why it's the case. But the basics of getting out and being active, there's nothing new here, and we shouldn't pretend it's new.
Yeah. So contrast these cardio activities we've been talking about with weightlifting and sort of stressful type bursting exercises. You have a couple of chapters on those about what the benefits and drawbacks are to those compared to cardiovascular exercise.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to be physically active. So cardio is basically anything that requires your heart to demand increased volume of output, right? What we call cardiac output. So basically, when you walk, you elevate your heart rate and you're pumping more blood through your body to supply your muscles and perfuse your brain and all that. And when you do something vigorous, you're getting your heart rate up even higher and you're pumping out even more blood. And all that stress on the cardiovascular system promotes the growth of capillaries and arterioles and keeps your vessels healthy. It's also good for your heart. So, given that heart disease is the number one killer of Americans, it's not a surprise that that cardio is generally very important for our health. But if you just walk around, I mean, you'll get a lot of benefit from that. But if you add some occasional intensity, what's now called high intensity interval training, but just something vigorous, basically.
Yeah.
It's just a fancy term for basically, getting your heart rate up even higher for short bits of time. that has extra benefits, right? Because it creates stresses that you don't get from just say walking. So mixing it up turns out to be good, but not all these things, not all these forms of sort of cardio get activate the kinds of high resistance exercise you get from strength training, right? Um, so and those turn on different kinds of genes and affect your muscles and your bones more, and that becomes a real problem as we age, because one of the real kind of sort of distressing things that occur as some people get older is that they get what's called sarcopenia, which just means muscle wasting. So their muscles start to lose strength, and that turns on a vicious circle because you have a hard time getting out of a chair or getting off the toilet or opening a jar of something, and that ends up leading to a kind of less physical activity because physical activity becomes hard, and then you spiral to this kind of vicious circle. And that's why most experts, and I completely agree, advocate as we get older, it's more important to keep up some weights. And just think about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? We all saw her workouts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, you don't have to do this no pain, no gain stuff. I mean, you don't need to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And in fact, hunter-gatherers who are reasonably strong, they're like 75th percentile by American and English standards, right? They're not bulked up, they're not jacked, they're not ripped, they're just reasonably strong. But in fact, they don't want to be really strong because muscles take up a lot of energy. And if you have a lot of muscle, you have to eat, you have to eat a lot more, and that's a problem, right? But because they stay physically active, they don't lose their strength as fast as Americans and Brits and Swedes do, etc. So they stay strong as they age, and that of course has benefits for your bones. It has benefits for your metabolism. It has benefits for your muscles, which then enable you to keep doing cardio, which is also really important. So it's like this complicated, interrelated mix that you can't really ever separate because we live a life where we don't have to do anything anymore. We ended up separating things, right? Because we create exercises, right? Instead of running after an animal and then butchering it, right? which is what my ancestors did and your ancestors did. That involved both cardio and weights, right? There's a wonderful movie you can watch it's on YouTube. It's on YouTube, I think, where you can watch some hunter gatherers in the Kalahari. They run after a giraffe, and that's pure cardio for several days. Right? They're chasing this giraffe. They're walking mostly, occasionally running, but then they have to butcher the giraffe. And a giraffe's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
And you can see that they're really struggling to carry, pick up these huge pieces of giraffe, right? So they're doing their existence involves everything, right? And today we have to now manufacture exercises that give us the same kinds of physical activity, the same kinds of benefits.
Remember, let's see, this had been mid-90s, so I was in my early 40s, and I was pretty strong, and I was on a hike with my dog, and she got bit by a rattlesnake. And right in the mouth. Ooh. I thought, oh, this is bad. And it was about a mile back to the car. So I carried her all the way back, and this just about killed me. And I remember thinking, how do these hunter-gatherers do this? I mean, this is incredible. And that's just a dog, not a big pig or something.
Well, that brings up a really interesting point because, it's true. We don't carry anything anymore, right? We have suitcases on wheels, and supermarket carts with wheels, and, nobody carries anything. And yet we, carried babies and food and whatever. But, carrying is also a skill. And it turns out there are better and worse ways to carry. Okay. But who teaches us to carry anymore? Right. We've got some experiments. We've been doing some experiments in Kenya where we're looking at people who carry weights on their head. Like women carry these enormous jerry cans of water on their head, and we put oxygen monitors on them. And it turns out they're able to carry like 20% of their body weight.
Whoa.
Huge weights.
Wow.
With no extra cost.
Whoa.
They're basically, they're doing it for free. And we've actually figured out how they do that. It's going to make a really cool paper. But that's a skill that, I've tried carrying stuff on my head. It's hard. I don't have the skill to do it. We have to have really good balance. You have to go good core. I have a photograph in the book of my student Andrew Yegian, who's doing this research, and he carried a jerry can of water up the hill in Kenya, and oh my God, he struggled. It was a spectacle.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I couldn't do that. I'm not strong enough, and I don't have the skill to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I had my daughter when I was 37, so schlepping her around on my shoulders and arms, no problem. But then I had my son at 61. And he's 4.5 now. I'm 66, and it's a lot more work now. It's one of my motivations for keeping up my upper body. So I bought these 5-pound wrist weights. So when I walk the dog, I have these little weights because I could tell once I hit my 60s, my arms started getting smaller. I never did anything kind of weights when I was a bike racer. And if anything, cyclists want lower body mass to haul up the hills.
Right.
But now I'm thinking I need some weights. So I bought these 25-pound weights so I could do some curls and stuff like that. I'm thinking this little guy's going to need me for a few more years, so I've got to kind of stay physically strong. But I can see the deterioration happening, even with a lifelong, lifestyle of working out. It's still happening. I can see it.
Sure, but the good news is that there are plenty of studies which show that the response to doing weights, right, doesn't deteriorate with age.
Oh, good.
So you can still stay strong. You can
Okay,
still
good.
get a benefit.
Yeah.
You still turn on those satellite cells in your muscles in your 80s and your 90s. So there's really some really fun studies. But then going back to what you just said, just think about trying to explain to your great-great-grandparents that you went out and spent your hard-earned money on weights whose sole purpose was to be lifted.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you think about it, that's the world we live in. I have weights in my basement too. I've bought things to be lifted, but it's kind of weird,
Yeah.
I mean, nobody ever did that until recently.
Yeah. And then give us the science behind BMI or the variation of it. I was always on the high end because I have a husky upper body that I got from my dad. And, I was always like at 24, even when I was super fit and lean. And so I always thought there's something wrong with this BMI thing. It doesn't account for, I don't know what it is, bone density or muscle mass or just, normal huskiness or not, versus there's a problem.
Yeah. So BMI is one of those perplexing indices that got kind of burned into the medical way of thinking, but it's basically your mass divided by your height squared.
Yeah.
In metric units. And so it's automatically a slightly problematic ratio because volume, your mass, right, is a function of volume, and that's a cubic function. And height is a linear function. So you've now taken a cubic function and you divided it by a linear function to the power of 2. So it's going to get the extremes wrong, right? So typically somebody has a BMI that's above 25, they're considered overweight. If they're above 30, they're considered obese. If they're under like 18.5, I think it is, they're considered underweight. But if you're very strong, you're going to have a higher BMI for your even though you may not have much fat at all, right? So and again, short people will have relatively higher BMIs, and tall people have relatively lower BMIs. So it's problematic. It's a problematic ratio in some ways.
Yeah.
But it does correlate to some extent. It's not perfectly. I think the correlation. I have the numbers in my book, and I don't remember the exact number, but it correlates roughly, about 80% with your fat, how much body fat you have. But it also doesn't tell you where the body fat is. So, the more we learn about fat, the more we learn that what really the most problematic fat is the fat that's in our abdomens.
Yeah.
It's our belly fat, or known as visceral fat or abdominal fat. Those fat deposits. So as fat cells swell, and they get too big, they start to become dysfunctional. They recruit, and white blood cells invade them, and then they start producing molecules, cytokines or adipokines in this case, that make us inflamed, right? And that leads to a wide range of problems. Visceral fat cells are particularly worrisome because they tend to be very hormone sensitive. There's a lot more hormone receptors on those cells, and to make matters worse, they empty straight into the liver, right? There's a vein called the portal vein, which basically sends your visceral abdominal material right to your liver, which makes your liver fatty. And And the thing is that we evolved this visceral fat as an adaptation, right?
Mm.
Natural selection did this because if you want energy in a rush, you don't have time to get it from your subcutaneous deposits that are, in your buttocks or your arm or your cheek or whatever. That's very stable fat. You want the very hormone sensitive fat that empties right into your liver. So that's good if you need energy.
Right.
The problem is that when you get into this inflamed, state with too much body fat, then you run into trouble. And so if you're really concerned about health, um, your what's often called your waist hip ratio or your waist height ratio is actually probably a better indicator of whether you should be concerned or not than your BMI. And then the other factor is that if you're trying to lose weight, the place you want to lose it is in your belly
Yeah.
again. So
Yeah.
if you have lots of fat in your buttocks, don't worry about it. It's fine. It's perfectly actually it's a very sensible place to store fat because it doesn't interfere with your center of mass and whatever. It's a great place to have fat. So don't worry about fat in your thighs or your buttocks or your cheeks or whatever. Worry about fat in your belly. And the good news is that exercise burns because it's so hormone sensitive. That's also the first fat that you burn.
Mm.
So when you're losing weight by exercising, you might or exercising, you might not lose all that much weight, partly because you're gaining muscle mass, but you're going to change the distribution of fat in your body in a way that really benefits you. And so that's another reason that we should worry more about health rather than about metrics like BMI or whatever. It's the world we live in, right?
Yeah.
If your blood pressure is 131, you're hypertensive. If you're 130, you're fine, right?
Well,
That's
what's
very
that
simple way
study?
of
You go to
thinking.
the doctor, and the average time is like 7.5 minutes. So they're just going to look for some bullet point proxy numbers for you, and then tell you this is what you should do. Goodbye and good luck.
That's right. And remember that our medical system is not designed to prevent bad health.
Right.
It's designed to treat you once you're already sick.
Right.
So 75% of diseases, according to the CDC, are preventable. So 75% of the time you go to a doctor, it's for a disease that you probably could have avoided, right?
Right.
And yet most doctors aren't paid to even see you until you get sick.
Right.
And there are entire fields of medicine that don't have the word preventive attached with it. I mean, have you ever heard of a preventive orthodontist or a preventive ophthalmologist or a preventive podiatrist? I mean, they don't even exist. And yet, and that's where physical activity and diet come in, right? Because they are, surprise, surprise. Again, our grandparents knew this, extremely preventive.
Yeah. My wife and I went and visited Deepak Chopra's Chopra Center in Carlsbad, California. It's at this 5-star resort on next to the beach. And, you do the whole thing, the yoga and the exercise and meditation and the green tea and everything. And, of course, Deepak argues this makes people feel better. And after I did, I thought, well, yeah, of course it does. Who the hell wouldn't feel better going to a 5-star resort at the beach for a week and getting massages and doing yoga? I get that idea of, like the wholeness, wellness thing, but, that may not address specific things like COVID or AIDS or whatever. I was going to ask you about your opinion on these, the daily fasting idea. You eat dinner at 7 and you don't eat again until like noon the next day. It's supposed to trigger your body to consume some of that belly fat or abdominal fat. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I'm really interested in it. It's called intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
And actually, of all the kinds of forms of preventive medicine, apart from diet and exercise, it seems to be the one that has the most support. Although I think the jury's still out on a number of the details. In fact, the New England Journal of Medicine did a really good review article almost about a year ago, reviewing the evidence on intermittent fasting. And I think that one of the reasons that intermittent fasting is healthy is that it's activating a lot of the same mechanisms that exercise is. In fact, if you look at the data, it is basically the same list of things. It's a partial list, and that's because one of the stresses of exercise is that you go into what's called negative energy balance. You're consuming more calories than you're using, and your body has to dig deep and find those calories from fat, from stores, and you have to turn on metabolic systems, etc. And intermittent fasting does the same thing, and it's turning on a lot of the same genetic, the same genes, the same cascades of genes. Except I don't think it's and of course in the past people didn't eat all the time. They didn't have refrigerators in their houses and
fast food restaurants,
kitchen cabinets filled with food. And or if you're in my building, and if I'm hungry, I can rush down to the there's a machine that has all kinds of chocolate bars and potato chips and whatever I want. I mean, we never go hungry anymore unless we choose to be hungry. So that's kind of interesting. Imagine explaining to your relatives that from a few generations ago that you pay money to not eat.
Right.
It makes sense to us today in the modern world, but or you go to some parts of the world where people are struggling and to getting enough food, and tell them that about people in the West pay extra money so that there's fewer calories in their food. So intermittent fasting does appear to be have some health benefits.
And what's the number? 16 hours or 14 hours or something like that?
I don't know, and I'm not sure if anybody's even come up with there's different kinds of intermittent fasting, and I don't know if there's enough good data. Interestingly enough, though, calorie restriction is much more controversial. So intermittent fasting was where you go through periods of negative energy balance, just like when you exercise. But that's different from calorie restriction, where you actually cut down your calories, and that's much more controversial. So in mice and in certain kinds of worms like C. elegans, etc., there's evidence that calorie restriction does prolong their life, but there's very little evidence that it does so in primates. And there's a very controversial study that was done a few years ago where they had two groups of macaques, one that was calorie restricted compared to another group, and there was really a big benefit. But it turns out when people looked at the non-calorie restricted primates, they were eating like junk food. They were eating like the equivalent of a high fat, high protein, and that high fat, high sugar diet. And a lot of them were getting diabetes and whatever. So that experiment was replicated. That experiment was done in Wisconsin, but so they replicated the experiment in Washington, in Maryland at NIH. This is extremely expensive experiment, by the way, and took a long time to do, right? And this time they had a bunch of macaques on a kind of normal, healthy macaque diet, and then some calorie restricted macaques. And in this second study, which was much better controlled, there was no benefit from the calorie restriction. So if you're comparing calorie restriction to a really crappy, what's called a standard American diet, a SAD diet, there's some benefits. But if you're comparing calorie restriction to a kind of a normal diet, it's not clear that there are any health benefits for at least for primates, and certainly not for humans. But intermittent fasting, like exercise, seems to be beneficial because it puts your body through short-term negative energy balance, which turns on a whole bunch of good responses by our bodies.
Yeah, I remember when UCLA scientist Roy Walford innovated that whole calorie restriction thing. He never looked healthy to me, and people I've met that do that, they don't, they're just hungry all the time. It doesn't seem like, you get to live an extra 10 years of life of that. It's like, no, thanks. There's got to be a better balance there. So either scientifically or personally, what is your opinion on the right ratio of meat, vegetables, fruits, grains, carbs, and so forth?
Well, we're veering off my expertise here, but I don't eat. I barely eat red meat. I try to avoid it. I guess I would be what most people call a Mediterranean diet, but I'm not like slavish to it. Look, if you look around the world at diets that seem to be healthy, they're incredibly diverse. Think about a Japanese traditional diet with rice and fish and lots of vegetables, a Chinese diet, a Mexican diet. You could go around the world and look at all kinds of amazing, diets that have been associated with good health. And I think it's easier to say what they don't have than what they do have. I mean, they all have lots of vegetables and not too much meat, but what they don't have is a lot of processed food. And what they don't have is food, with the fiber removed and sugar added and extra fat added.
Right.
Beyond that, I think it's very hard to come to any really simplistic conclusion. So I think any kind of traditional, reasonably wholesome diet that's not extreme, there's not a lot of evidence that you can do much better than that.
And what is your opinion on cholesterol and taking a statin? Do you take a statin? Like I take a 10 milligram statin because in my whole life, my cholesterol was always just slightly on the high side. Even when I was bike racing 500 miles a week, and it was lean as could be. I still had like 2 to 220, my overall cholesterol. This was back in the 70s before they made the distinction between LDL and HDL. My father had, and his brother had high cholesterol. They all had heart disease. So I thought I should just take it just in case. But I never know if this, what the science is on that.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that either. I mean, I think that certainly there's a genetic component to high cholesterol. But the more we learn about it, the more we realize that the different kinds of lipoproteins, which is really what we're talking about, low density lipoproteins and high density lipoproteins and triglycerides, those are the fats that are floating around in your bloodstream. That the ratios are kind of different, so, for example, statins, what they do is they really lower your LDL levels, right? They basically prevent your liver from producing these lipoproteins. But there's also side effects of statins. They affect mitochondrial function. So high doses of statins make it actually harder to be an athlete. But there's plenty of evidence that statins are among the most successful pharmaceuticals ever produced, and they have unquestionably had a lot of benefit. But also, to what extent that affects one individual's health outcomes versus another, I'm not an expert. That's totally
every doc I've had or met,
so
just take the statin. Even my cardio cycling friends who have low cholesterol, they take the statin anyway, just in case. I thought, okay, well,
interesting.
Preventative,
Interesting. Well, I mean, one of the interesting things about a lot of studies today is that it's actually, because statins have been shown to have such benefits, when you do a randomized control study, you can't have a non-statin arm of the study. So we don't have really good data about what happens in the absence of statins from the last, I don't know how many years. And it used to be that people would give like vitamin, like B vitamins, which would also lower cholesterol. We just don't have a lot of good data on that, actually.
Yeah. Another one of my favorite parts of your book, because it hit home personally, was this calcium score you could get that is apparently a proxy, or at least it's supposed to be a proxy for blockage in your arteries, in your coronary arteries. Anyway, the reason I heard about this is because one of my cycling friends up here, his brother had a cardiac arrest on the group ride. And he just keeled over, boom, and they got the EMTs out there, and they rescued him, and he's okay now. But turns out he had massive blocking, even though he was a cyclist. And his brother, my buddy, who was an Olympic cyclist, and he is lean as could be. He's like 130 pounds. He rides, 3-4 hours a day, and, just as fit as could be, just flies up these hills in Santa Barbara here, these just massive climbs. He just flies up them. And his score came back to like 600. And I thought, holy crap, I'm going to go get mine, because mine must be massive. Well, mine was like 106. And I thought, what can this test actually really measure? Because I'm way beefier and fat than this guy, and his is 6 times higher than mine. And anyway, so you had that little discussion about what that really means, or what it might mean.
Yes. Yeah. So this is called a coronary artery calcium score, right? A CAC score. So when you have a plaque, right, when you form atherosclerosis, those plaques, one of the ingredients of those plaques is calcium. So they kind of show up in a CT scan. And so there's we like to measure things, which is a good thing. So we measure your CAC score, how many of these plaques you have. But it turns out that not all plaques are the same, because that calcification is also a response to stress. So if you have high flow in an artery, particularly where there are bifurcations, those high stresses create damage to the arterial wall. And calcium appears to be part of the kind of repair mechanism that our bodies have, right? And so not all calcified regions of those arteries are actually plaques that cause atherosclerosis and coronary heart disease. And so it turns out that if you actually look at athletes who have high CAC scores, they have no negative outcome from these high CAC scores.
Right.
So they're because we're basically comparing apples and oranges. We're comparing plaques that are part of a normal reparative process from people who have really just kind of stressed their cardiovascular system with with coronary calcification scores that are the result of a pathogenic buildup of fatty, kind of cholesterol-filled plaques that are extremely dangerous, like a little time bomb in your heart. And that can lead to interesting kind of results. So there's some researchers who've taken CT scans of mummies, which is really cool. And you can see coronary calcifications from thousands and thousands of years ago in these dried mummy hearts. The question is that they don't really know if these are healthy calcifications or unhealthy calcifications, and we all just label them the same way. So doctors, cardiologists need to kind of wise up a little bit and stop being so simplistic about measuring. Of course, good ones know what's going on.
I wonder if that also...
No, it's just easy. It's easy not to think. It's easy not to think.
I wonder if that also helps explain that study, the Korean War soldiers, American soldiers coming home, and some percentage of them already had atherosclerosis started in their early 20s. I wonder if what it really was. I wonder if it was something like this calcium score that was a proxy for something else, the stress of war or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. You do build up plaques as you get older, so they will start when you're young. It's just that we don't notice them until we get older. So
yeah. Staving off the inevitable decay of the body, as Woody Allen said in that. I think it was Hannah and Her Sisters, where he's out walking down the East River and all these joggers are coming by, and he goes, "Look at all these people putting off the inevitable decay of their bodies." Well, that's right. That's what we're doing. And a little bit of that's good.
That's exactly it. Is what we're doing.
Another important passage in your book, in the last chapter here on the immune system. In one noteworthy study that could never be done in people, researchers gave a life-threatening strain of influenza to mice and then forced some of them to exercise for 3 days before the onset of symptoms. An impressive 82% of the mice who were exercised moderately, 20 to 30 minutes a day at a modest speed, survived. 43% of the sedentary mice survived, so about half. And only 30% of the mice forced to exercise for 2.5 hours a day survived. So apparently there's a curve there, a upside down U curve.
Yeah, that's right. So this is called the open window hypothesis, right? So, I guess we were talking about trade-offs earlier. Everything uses energy, right? So energy spent on physical activities, energy you don't spend on something else. And in this case, the concern is that extreme amounts of physical activity, and for a mouse, that might be running really hard on a treadmill for 2.5 hours a day, takes energy away from the immune system. And so, immune systems are very expensive. That's why we get so tired when we're fighting a disease, right? We're spending a lot of energy on our immune, on all this monoclonal, the antibodies that we're producing, et cetera. So there's a concern that that over-exercising can actually make you more vulnerable to infectious disease. I will say, though, that there's not a lot of evidence to support that. It's more anecdotal evidence, but it might indeed be true. But of course, there are very few people who are out there at that end of the curve. Really, the problem is the other side of the U-shaped curve. People are not getting enough exercise, and there's no question that physical activity upregulates key components of the immune system. It causes your body, for example, with regard to COVID, there's plenty of evidence that physical activity, moderate normal levels, cause our bodies to produce more what's called natural killer cells and cytotoxic T cells. Both of those cells types should get us very excited these days because they're the ones that kill virally infected cells. And furthermore, exercise redeploys those cells to vulnerable parts of the body, especially the respiratory tract of the lung. So I think, there's no good data yet on COVID because, we haven't had this disease around long enough, and people are just struggling to treat people who are sick. But I'll make a bet that there's a relationship between, again, that U-shaped curve is probably going to show up, right? That people who are more active, even after you control for weight and blood pressure and various other things, will probably have had some benefit. But then that's hypothesis. I don't have data to prove
Anecdotally, that. Pro cyclists are super sensitive to getting colds. They get sick all the time, mainly because they're always right at the edge of their, kind of total fatigue most of the time. During the Tour de France, they famously don't even walk upstairs. They just basically go from the bike to the hotel room and plop down. I mean, it's not normal, right? That can't be good.
No, that's one of the most amazing things. I've had the pleasure of watching the Tour de France a few times, and it's just breathtaking what those people do. I don't understand how. I mean, you biked across the U.S. I mean, I don't know how anybody does that, but it's not a normal thing.
No. No,
we did not evolve to do that. That's for sure.
Yeah, no. During RAM, I would have all kinds. I would get like a lot of canker sores in my mouth, just from the normal whatever that virus is that everybody pretty much is born with, that causes cold sores. They would come raging back, and and I'd just have all kinds of just feeling like crap for obvious reasons. I think, again, it's part of that balance. Well, yeah. I think I really liked your last chapter. I mean, these are the kind of things I guess you think about in your mid-60s, cancer, Alzheimer's, osteoporosis, cardiovascular. I mean, you cover all this, obesity, diabetes, and so on. Let's just kind of close it out here by giving us kind of the sweeping perspective, what exercise can and cannot do in terms of like longevity and health.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, the last chapter is really meant to be kind of almost like an appendix, because I don't expect people to sit down and necessarily read that in one fell swoop. Of course, they might, but rather a place you could look up. What's the mismatch in terms of not, because remember, we think about exercise as medicine, but really a better way of thinking about it is that the absence of physical activity it makes you more vulnerable to disease. And medicine is basically, exercise is really restoring kind of normal function that kind of is that we evolved for. So I outline what's known about the effects of physical inactivity versus physical activity on obesity and diabetes and heart disease and cancer and osteoporosis and osteoarthritis and infectious diseases, and I'm leaving some out, but it's kind of the major causes of death today in the world. And the answer is depression and anxiety as well, which is important. And the answer is that for most of them, physical activity is important prevention and sometimes also a treatment. And we know why, and we know enough about the mechanisms that it's not just a kind of epidemiological kind of relationship. It's actually there's also a mechanistic explanation, but it's also, I think, tempering to also realize that, again, although there are benefits, they're not cure-alls and they're not magic bullets. Yeah. They reduce your vulnerability, but they're not going to necessarily prevent things. So, like one thing that surprises people, for example, is Alzheimer's, growing disease, really concerning. We still don't really understand Alzheimer's. There's all kinds of problems with our understanding of Alzheimer's. But the one thing we do know quite clearly is that by far the best way to prevent Alzheimer's is to be physically active. It can reduce your vulnerability, your likelihood, by maybe 30-40%, according to some studies. The same is true of breast cancer, colon cancer, again, for different reasons. Yeah. And I think it's empowering to know that. And again, if you have that little inner voice in your brain saying, I think I'll take the elevator today. Hopefully that will help you activate this kind of what Kahneman calls the slow part of your brain, and help you come up with some kind of rational override, so that you can get yourself out there and do something that will help you thrive.
Dan, I loved your book. I think it's really a super important book, particularly this COVID year. Where we're going to spend 2021 deciding, how to be healthy again. I actually think it's possible that given the pandemic and the shutdown, more people maybe turned out were exercising, and maybe they'll have new habits that they'll continue forward.
Well, the data are, there's not a lot of data, but the data are that people who have the wherewithal are exercising more. Yeah. People who like to, but then it's kind of, and then as always the case, the people who are struggling to exercise are actually exercising less. Yeah. Oh, and so, okay. So, we live in this world where there's the inequalities are growing, and physical activity and exercise is no exception, and yet of all the things that we can do that basically cost nothing, right? This is one that we should invest in, because, it doesn't take a lot.
Yeah, one of the take homes from your book is just move, like your hunter gatherer people. Just
Yeah.
move, move, move. You don't have to do anything fanatical. Just get up and move around.
But don't feel bad about it. Don't feel
Right.
bad that you don't want to.
Right.
It's normal. I
Yeah.
mean, I went for a run the other. I didn't go for running this morning because I didn't have time. So I used the machine in my basement for a little bit. But yesterday morning I went for a run and I did not want to go. I mean, I was whinging, I was complaining.
Yeah.
I probably spent 45 minutes driving my wife crazy, and she kind of patiently listened to me. But I did get out the door.
Yeah.
And partly because I was, and I was glad I did after a while.
Yeah.
But that's normal.
Yeah,
And
that is
even the
normal.
most successful exercisers on the planet have trouble doing it, and we should help people understand that that's normal. There's nothing wrong with them. They're completely, absolutely normal.
Yeah, the group I ride with up here, they leave at 7 a.m. on the group ride days, 3 days a week. My other cycling friends say, "Well, I don't want to get up that early." I say, "I don't either." But that doesn't mean you know
Exactly.
that's normal. Of course, I don't want to go out there and freeze.
Well, I mean, I think for me, one of the arguments that I'm proud of in the book is I think we should, or I want to push maybe, is that we should treat exercise like education, right? We have to make it necessary. We have to make it rewarding, and exercising with friends like a group ride is exactly how we
Yeah.
do that. I mean,
Yeah.
I run with friends too, and if my friend Aaron is waiting on the corner for me at 6
You
a.m.
know,
in the
you got to
morning,
get out there.
I don't want to be there,
Right.
but I have to go.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm always glad I did
That's right.
afterwards.
Well, Dan, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for writing your book, and thanks for your important work. And we'll talk to you for whatever the next book is. What's next on the agenda?
Good. Well, I do. I am thinking about another one.
Okay.
It's still in the
Okay.
in the not yet ready to talk about stage.
All right. All right. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. My pleasure. Take care.